Thank you, Gordy. Look, so we'll now turn to any questions on the financial statements or the management of the company. Dave King, our Corporate Affairs Manager, will relay the questions that come through online. We'll do our best to answer all your questions, and where we have a number of questions on the same topic, we may consolidate the response. But please feel free to continue to enter any questions through the portal. For questions relating to the actual resolutions, we'll respond to these as we deal with each of the resolutions in turn. So, Dave, questions.
First question, how many employees will Ryman employ at the 31st of August 2020? I'm concerned that your drive is becoming more about extension of building more villages rather than concentrating on the care of the inmates. Bigger is not always best.
What a good question. What a good question. So maybe Gordy and I will tag team on this, but firstly I'd like to identify that we'd prefer residents to be called residents rather than inmates. But that aside, at August, I'm anticipating the staffing numbers to be around 6,000 is currently the staffing number. Yeah. The bigger is not always best is absolutely correct. What makes us bigger is our determination to meet the needs of citizens who want to have the Ryman experience. So our drive to get bigger is really to reflect the demand that exists for what we have to offer in a village. So it's not more about big villages, it's about providing more care. That's what I see as the driver. Yeah. Do you want to add to that, Gordon?
Oh, I really agree with that, David. I'll give you an example of when we have a construction stage delay, because unfortunately they do happen. So when that happens, the first thing I think about is how incredibly inconvenient that's going to be for people. And that's when you really see how much it affects people's lives. You know, we have hundreds and thousands of people who want to come and live with us each year. And when I spend time with people just quietly one-on-one, it's been a really big decision for them. And they're inevitably just delighted that they have found the place that's really going to be working great for them for the rest of their days. So when I see like our build program not going as fast as it could, I don't kind of look at it and go, you know, what about the money coming through? I mean, you know, I more think about the fact we don't want to let residents down. You know, and when we do a grand opening at a new village, one of the most beautiful things is that people come up to you all night and they just tell you what a change it's made to their life moving into a village and how great it's been. So I kind of just see our build program and what we do build-wise as creating that home for people. And our focus on care, I think, has really never been more to the fore over the last 8 months, where people and their families have trusted us with their lives, and we've done everything we can to make sure we repay that faith.
Thanks, Dave.
Another question, have you considered having a dividend reinvestment plan?
Oh, another good question. So, in fact, that has been a live discussion at the board table in the last couple of board meetings. The challenge we have is that a good number of our shareholders enjoy the dividend stream that they now achieve, and it steadily has been growing. On the other hand, there are a number of investors who would prefer that we reinvested in the business. And so that has driven the conversation around a dividend reinvestment plan. We haven't settled on a decision around that yet, but I can maybe best answer it by saying it is a live discussion at present.
Thank you. Question from Kim Santa. With the border being closed, what issues, if any, are arising with filling staff vacancies at your care centres?
Do you want to go first?
So, hello, Kim. Sorry you couldn't. I think you've been to every AGM for many years, so it must be very frustrating being online. So, hi. I guess you're a Napier, eh? So, staff-wise, so we review staffing really closely all the time. On Tuesday, when I looked at it, we had it was either 4 or 5 permanent registered nurse vacancies in the whole group. And we employ about 527 registered nurses. So on the nursing front, no issues with employment and then generally on the caregiver front and stuff. Obviously, it's always hard to find good people, but we are able to sort of find shifts and fill shifts really well. One of the things your question does point to, though, is that longer-term immigration strategy is obviously really important, as is workforce planning with people within New Zealand and also within Australia. So it's never one or the other. You work on both fronts, and we've got a good relationship with government on both sides of the Tasman, and both understand how critical the overseas workforce play in caring for older people, together with wanting to see people trained locally as well, of course.
Question from Graham Geddes. Bearing in mind the negative effect COVID has had on trading results and also the widespread example set by other boards, executive teams, civil servants and politicians, why is this board not demonstrating the same self-awareness and empathy by taking a 20% reduction in fees for at least the current financial year?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Graham. Firstly, I'd observe that during this COVID crisis, we have had no staff let go. All staff have continued to be employed. We have increased remuneration for all our staff across all village caregiving staff and administrative staff. The senior executive team have not taken an increase in remuneration, and of course the directors have not sustained any increase in remuneration for in excess of 2 years, and that of course was one of the considerations that drove the decision to withdraw the motion. So I would observe, though, that the directors have been exemplary in their preparedness to jump in and help over the last 6 months. There's been innumerable board meetings called at short notice, and people have freed themselves up and contributed actively, read the documents, given good and deep thought, so to make the right decision. So, there has been an increase in workload. There has been an acknowledgement that, in fact, there's been no staff lost, and staff have actually experienced an increase in remuneration. So it's different from many other companies.
Thank you. Another one from Kim Santa. Interest-bearing debt has grown exponentially in the last 5 years or so. Given the very uncertain times ahead, should the company slow down new development on a temporary basis to the point where it is largely or fully funded from net operating cash flows?
Yeah, great question, Kim. We monitor capital recycling really closely, and one of the measures there you can see is how our total assets have grown over time significantly, and our debt has grown, I guess, in line with that. And so have our underlying profits. Our operating cash flows were up 12% to 31 March 20, and our receipts from residents are also up 12% as well to 1.1 billion, I think it was. So, but I guess, Kim, what you're wondering is the 12 sites we've got on the go. Like, we don't commit to stages unless we can see good demand. So the thing that I would worry about if I was you as a shareholder is, would we just box on and build a village out if sales weren't keeping up? So one of the things that me and Dave does and the board look at as well is we keep a very close eye on making sure we don't overbuild. And it's it's key for me to know that we've got $337 million of unconditional new sale contracts currently today that underpins the stages of independent apartments and townhouses and so on that we recommitted to after COVID. And of course we've got more sales to come, and even yesterday when we were going into lockdown 3 here in Auckland, which is a big market for us, we still did 12 sales amazingly. So so we watch it really closely, Kim, really closely.
Question from Helen and Edwin Hynett. Regarding reported outbreak of COVID-19 cases in Victoria, what effect is it having on our operations in that area? How many cases of COVID-19 have Ryman experienced in Victoria?
So we have had no COVID-19 cases of our active staff or current residents. So our villages have been COVID-free from a staff and resident point of view, which is an incredible achievement by the team. We have had the occasional contractor who has had COVID, and they've been isolated very quickly, and the relevant testing done just to make sure there's no issues there, which there have not been. We do extremely rigid checks for everyone entering in the village gates, ranging from scent checks, because people can lose their sense of smell, through to temperature declarations, knowing where people live, who they live with, whether they've had exposure to quarantine departures. So we try and develop a very thorough understanding of who's coming into our village. Certainly visitors can't come in now, and we're very, very careful with our staff checks. And then in addition to that, we have significant layers of personal protection equipment, PPE, which is just religiously worn, and we do quite significant checks to make sure that is done all the time. And look, it was really good, the audit David referred to earlier, where the health authorities came out a week ago to check on our procedures, and they thought they were excellent. Probably one of the biggest practical effects would be managing staff stand-downs for illness. I think that's probably one of the most difficult operational things to do. So right now in Australia, there are 57 staff off who are off on a precautionary basis because they're either not feeling well or they have a sort of like a second removed association with someone who's COVID positive or something like that. So we just stand people down immediately on pay for 14 days, and we make sure they're tested. But across 2 villages, that's a lot of people to reorganise, 57 people. And you know what? Across the whole group, since February this year when we started doing this, or start of February or late January, we've had 1,000 staff members who have taken COVID precautionary leave. It's extraordinary. And I really take my hat off to the operations team for managing what is usually a fairly stable roster to manage.
And it's also a great credit to the staff because they've been absolutely honest about their environment that they live in and the risks that they have been exposed to. So you know, it's everybody's made a fabulous effort, which is why we are at this moment COVID free. But one has to be constantly aware that there is I'd hate to use the word, but there is an element of luck because something can go through. You know, it's the Swiss cheese scenario. But you know, I just couldn't thank our staff enough for the attention they've paid to being honest about this.
There's one other thing I think we should say is that it's very serious business COVID, but our residents are also having fun. So like we're doing things like Zumba on the balconies outside with social distancing. We're delivering happy hour in a bag. I think at last count we've delivered 80,000 happy hours in a bag. We do fantastic digital activities for people to do in their own homes and that sort of thing. We do welfare check-ins for people to make sure they're okay or just someone to chat to. So there's a ton of things going on, which means that life in the village just isn't sort of sitting in your room. There's lots of ways we're supporting people with activities, and even Zoom. You know, there must be about 10,000 Zoom calls we've made now across the group since COVID started, just as a way to keep people in touch. So we're doing everything we can in difficult circumstances for people to have fun, to feel connected, and for us to try and look after their every need.
And I think that's reflected in the Net Promoter Scores that you identified in the presentation, Gordy. Yeah. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, from Kwan Ying Chi, with the company extending its business interests in Australia, does it intend to seek a listing on the ASX?
No.
Not at this time. We have contemplated dual listing, but we are not. That's not an active discussion at this moment.
Thanks. Neil Anderson, knowing how many of Ryman's skilled nursing and caregivers are migrants, how is Ryman now managing expansion plans with being able to recruit sufficient skilled workers with the COVID pandemic and the restrictions that it has brought? With that in mind, what is Ryman doing about accessing the government's recently announced apprenticeship and training packages to recruit more New Zealanders from schools and universities?
Yep, so we've been doing a lot of work with the Nurse Entry to Practice program, which is called NETP. We are doing work for building apprentices. We've actually got an apprentice trainer who works in the office here and travels around doing some great training stuff, which I think he showed me how to make something square the other day. And we've got apprenticeship programs which we have implemented for kitchens and that sort of thing. And we are working with schools and polytechs and obviously job shows to make sure that for people in New Zealand that they understand the tremendous career opportunity that Ryman Healthcare represents. We've actually started a Ryman Academy so that people can see the training opportunities and the range of scholarships, apprenticeships, and just ability to work with us has been I think put forward really well by the team, and so we're seeing really good applications for jobs and that sort of stuff. Of course, we are conscious of the fact that there are immigrants within New Zealand currently who are working for us who will be worried about their long-term future under COVID for all sorts of reasons. And my commitment to you is that we make sure that we have very strong dialogue with the government, with the previous immigration minister and who the next one will be, and we want to make sure that people are treated fairly and their significant contribution to New Zealand's healthcare over many years and during this time is recognised by the country. So that will be one of our key priorities after the election on 23rd September.
This is what a shareholder has described as a non-question, but they asked for it to be read out. The shareholder is Andrew Ott. Just wanted to say I have heard very complimentary reports from a number of people who are living at Ryman villages of the care they have received through the New Zealand lockdown. He'd like to express his appreciation and thanks to all of Ryman's staff, management and board for their efforts and ongoing work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. And look, I see some of the incoming messages to Gordy and the team, and it makes me immensely humbled to think that people are so grateful, and that I think we're very fortunate to be in a position to make that sort of situation possible, where they do feel safe and do feel cared.
Question from
Thanks, Andrew.
Kiran Bala. What is the rationale of having dementia and critical care beds within Ryman villages? I ask this as it is a regulated rate of recovery, at least in Victoria, and that would cause the return to you to be crimped.
I don't really understand that question, Dave. You might have to read that out one more time.
What is the rationale of having dementia and critical beds within Ryman villages? I ask this as it is a regulated rate of recovery, at least in Victoria, and would that cause the return to be crimped?
Well, I think what the question is asking is that there's controlled over the fees associated with dementia care provision.
Yeah.
But what we're much more focused on is what do the residents need, and so we would to actually move somebody out of our village who'd been maybe in an independent apartment and then rest home care, and then to say, no, you have dementia and you need to go somewhere else, it just is unconscionable to us. So yes, the remuneration associated with dementia care and care generally is not ideal, but that's part of the promise that we give people.
Yeah, and look, this is why we report an underlying profit, just one underlying profit for the group, and that's because that we see what we do at a village as providing a continuum of care for our residents at one village. And that means independent living, assisted living, rest home, hospital, dementia level care, or in Australia, high care, low care, dementia. So they're the names for them right now. Now, inevitably at any point in time, different points in time, government funding changes or there's some sort of short-term measure. But for dementia care, what we think about is when you go and visit a dementia unit and you see an independent resident that you know well visiting his wife, say, or a lady visiting her husband in dementia, the ability for them to visit their loved one on site without having to drive and spend as much time as they like with them is a huge benefit for people, and that's part of our promise of having a continuum of care. And so if that particular part of the business in dementia care had some financial constraints on capping out earnings, then we really need to look at the whole picture, which is what we do. So we're okay with that.
I wonder how hard is it for us to actually go to George as chairman of our clinical governance committee? Is that a complicated thing for us to do, to have George pass a comment?
Yeah, can you hear me, David?
Yes, thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah. So what is unique about Ryman, especially when you compare the Australian landscape, is that continuum of care and the ability to be able to, engage a couple coming into, say, independent living in one of our villages, and then to follow their journey. And one part of that couple might have a different kind of need evolve over time. And as you get older, the ability to make critical decisions, sophisticated and complex decisions around healthcare become really challenging. And what I really appreciate about the Ryman model, which from an Australian perspective is still very unique, is the ability to offer that continuum of care in whatever complexity it presents, other than obviously acute hospital admission, is really unique. And that's one of the things that I think give people a deep peace of mind. We talk about a safe haven in a time of pandemic, but also that that journey of life in our older years. Ryman provides that safe haven context to be supportive to families, and we continue to do this in an environment where it is deeply complex. For an organisation to provide that kind of continuum of care right up into high quality dementia care on a single campus is rare and unique, and the Australian market will continue to embrace it because nobody dares to sort of try to offer that kind of continuum in any great numbers. So that's what makes it very special.
Thanks, George. And isn't that a tribute to the technology team, all the guys who make this all happen? So, Dave, back to you for another question.
Question from,
Isn't it?
question from Jessica Budendick. As you have confirmed, all staff have and are working very hard to keep residents safe under very challenging circumstances and risking their own health. How do you respond to negative stories, dragging up old cases, and once again putting the sector in a bad light? This does not help staff's morale.
Yeah. So, look, there are always going to be situations where expectations are not met, and I guess that maybe the most live example of that has been with the Royal Commission in Australia, and aged care quality standards and have not been ideal in all situations over there, and that's been reflected in some instances of inadequate resourcing. But what we've tried to do is to always set ourselves a high standard and strive to achieve that high standard. So we hope that the quality that we offer will meet people's expectations. There will be, because there are people involved, there will always be moments when people are disappointed, and we have learnt that the best situation then is to try and apologise and work out how to do it better. And so our sort of general approach is that we aim for 100%, but 99.9 is pretty good.
And we're getting really good feedback on recruitment in Australia, where there's been a lot of pressure. So like Joanne Wang, who's our clinical lead in Victoria, she was saying to me the other day that she's been interviewing quite a few people to, fill up the ranks of the two villages there. And people are coming to us because they've heard about how we have treated our staff in terms of, care parcels, wellbeing initiatives, making sure that people have got all the right PPE, making sure that the rosters are full and that there's plenty of staff coverage, and all those sort of things that make your work experience in this sort of environment so crucial. And so for us, that's what's really important, is to create a great impression for people so that they want to come and work for us and can see that we're going to look after them really well as staff members. And then in turn, that means that the resident gets a better outcome too.
And it's interesting that the Royal Commission's early recommendations around staffing levels, we meet or exceed those already.
Yeah.
So I think that the resourcing of aged care in Australia has not really enabled the quality of care that people now expect.
Another question from Kwan Ying Chi. Is the company not considering taking advantage of the current low interest rate scenario by refinancing and issuing low coupon medium to long term bonds? This may help the company to reduce significantly its financing costs.
Look, we're always looking at different options for the diversity of our capital flows within debt. Currently, it's traditional interest-bearing bank debt, but we're certainly open to other ways of doing that, and that we actively explore those avenues all the time. And if we ever decide to do anything, obviously we would let shareholders know.
Yeah.
Question?
Maybe a call out to the banks. Our
Oh,
banks have been very supportive at difficult times. When COVID first became a problem in New Zealand, we were in a very short period of time able to secure our funding lines, and they've been very supportive over many years, and we're grateful of that.
Yeah, our banking partners are terrific, and they know and the thing that I like is that you never want to have a lend from a banker that doesn't understand your business. And when you speak with our banking syndicate, they know what we do really well, and they've taken the time and effort to understand it. And so that's why we get a really good hearing from the banks, and it's a two-way street. We see them as partners, not as people that we transact with, and I believe that results in a really good position for both of us.
Question from Karen Bala. Congratulations on having a COVID-free environment in Victoria. It has been a major achievement. I saw an item on TV as to the actions taken at your Nellie Melba site, which was very complimentary. However, there was no mention at all that it was a Ryman village. Had this been publicised, it would have helped in the marketing of other villages. Just a missed opportunity.
Yeah,
Can only agree.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's the downside of dual branding, isn't it? Because of course in Australia, Nellie Melba's on the $100 note, isn't she? Or the 50? Is it the 50 or the 100, Dave?
100.
On the $100 note. An amazing opera singer, so well known, and Ryman isn't so well known. So we should be trying to get both brand names out there. But we've had that dual brand strategy for a while, and that didn't quite work on that occasion. So we're sorry about that.
Janet Chambers' question. No visitors. How is this impacting the emotional and mental well-being of your residents?
Yeah. Oh, look, it's really I think it's really challenging for our staff, for our residents, and for their families. There are things that we can do, such as Zoom calls, phone calls. Our staff are just naturally very caring and have a small sort of cohort of people that they look after themselves, so they get to know the residents really well. And you can see that when you visit villages, that it's not just someone doing a round with lots of different people. They really know Dave really well. They really know David well, and there's a good banter and good chat. And it's not the same as seeing your family, of course, but I really think that at times like this, that sort of measure is justifiable. It's just another way that we can keep people safe, which is the main thing, and use alternative tools to really try and reconnect with people. And the challenge, therefore, in the care centre is for our staff to spend that little bit more time with people, maybe have an even closer relationship. And from what I can hear and what I'm seeing is that that's going really well. And of course, it's not easy wearing a mask and narrow face shield. That just makes the challenge all the more.
It was a great initiative to cohort our carers into small groups of residents, because that means that there is that level of intimacy, and that oh, how are you today, and yesterday you weren't feeling so good. So it's the conversation that actually makes one feel loved and as if one belongs. But as Gordy says, not the same as family, and that's why the Zoom has been really successful. Zooming between families and their other family members. So it's not ideal, but we're doing the best we can, Janet. So.
Steve Nelson asks, could you please give us a brief review of Ryman's Victoria operations? Are there any COVID infections in staff or residents in the current lockdown? And Ryman's New Zealand operating model being replicated in Australia, does it give you a significant advantage over many other operating models in that market?
Rightio. If I forget various parts of that question, can you prompt me? So what was the first bit?
We have answered that actually.
Yeah, we've answered.
COVID
so
infections?
no COVID so far, touch wood. And so I think maybe the heart of the question is Victoria better to operate in than New Zealand if you take COVID out of the picture? Which we should do. COVID is a temporary thing. So for us, we see in Melbourne a very strong opportunity for quite a number of reasons. Principally though, because what we're doing is we're offering a Ryman experience, which is the same as what we do in New Zealand, which people have loved here, and people are really embracing in Melbourne and Victoria, with things like a deferred management fee capped for life at 20%, with things like fixed weekly fees for life, most importantly with a continuum of care village, with aged care on site, including right up to secure dementia care. And so the problem we're trying to solve for people is the majority of people will want to stay in their own home for the rest of their days. And so for you to make a decision that changes that, you need to be moving somewhere and wanting to live somewhere where you really trust the other party that they can look after you for the rest of your days. And that's what we've been able to do in New Zealand, and that's what we're doing in Victoria, and that's proving to be really popular. So people like our really fair terms, they like what we physically do in terms of providing care, and my perception is they really like the ethos of Ryman Healthcare, which is as simply encapsulated as we strive to do stuff that would be as good as it would be for your own mum and dad. And for me, that's the highest standard you can think of. And we don't get it right all the time, but that's what we're trying to do. And doing it all within one company. So there's a lot of trust that's building up, and we've just got to keep on doing that.
And I think, as George just mentioned, the uniqueness of our offering is advantageous. So I think that there was maybe that question included that concern.
Question from John O'Malley. Given that Melbourne house prices are forecast to decline by 20%, what impact will this have on future unit sales?
Well, first of all, we don't know what's going to happen with house prices. I must admit, I've been at Ryman for 15 years, and I think economists have predicted 15 of the last 2 housing downturns. It's amazing how negative, taking New Zealand, things were in housing, and speaking to real estate agents, it's the exact opposite. You know, properties are just getting snapped up. And I suppose the reason for that is that we're actually seeing very strong migration inward to both Australia and New Zealand of permanent migrants returning back from countries where they will be coming back to live permanently with cash, probably in higher numbers than just a normal immigration year. Combined with very low interest rates and government support for jobs, I'm not underplaying the challenges that the economies face, but all I can say is what we're seeing right now. And what we're seeing right now is that the markets have been pretty stable, people are transacting, and the stuff of life goes on. And of course, we will be very cautious and watch the housing market. And to my earlier point on demand, we won't be building, new apartment buildings where we don't have pre-sales and we don't have demand with pricing that works for us. So we'll keep a real close eye on that.
Just to add to that, so Gordy, as we reported at our half year, we've got over 30% sort of price buffer between the current real estate market where we're developing and what we're selling our villages for. So there's significant headroom in that pricing as well.
Yeah. And maybe before I make one point, I'll just need to apologise to Jeff, who's an economist, and for Gordy's comments about economists predicting so many housing price crashes. The other point that needs to be borne in mind is the average age of people entering a village is in the vicinity of 80 years, and most of the decisions are driven by a need. And the need might be a healthcare need or a loneliness need, or so these are needs-based decisions. It's not sort of a lifestyle choice. So that also will drive demand, and they will, by and large, be mortgage-free in their home, and so a reduction in the value of their home was really, it was money they never actually had in their pocket. All right, so provided we keep that buffer between the cost, the money that they realise from selling their home, and that we charge them for entering our village, then I believe the demand will continue.
Question from John Boscawen. Did you claim any New Zealand taxpayer subsidies? If so, how much? If not, why not?
Okay. Yes, we did. We claimed the wage subsidy. At a group level, we would have been entitled to, I think it was about 25 million. We actually took advice from a large accounting firm to see what the most prudent approach would be. That was to do it on a village by village basis. The total was 14 million. We applied for that and we received that. And we had detailed discussions with the government departments just to make sure that they understood and we were clear on why we put the claim in. And so essentially it's a result of having a 6-week period where we couldn't transact in relation to our retirement village units and incurred obviously major costs associated with that. And we haven't made anyone redundant, which I think is really crucial.
Okay, last question, which is from G.R.E. Whiteley. It's not so much a question, I think, as a comment. It says, "This has been the best AGM presentation I have watched. What I want to let you know is what comes through loud and clear is that you are all empathetic. That is a treasured value that is not often seen. I want to thank you for that. All the best with your endeavours, and also thanks for looking after my dad and stepmum who live in one of your villages. I can now see why my dad loves it so much and enjoys the best of care, i.e. it is led at the top by Ryman, so it flows on through. Now that is leadership. Cheers."
Well, that makes me feel quite emotional, really, to hear someone say that. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
So look, we've gone quite a wee while, and I think we need to move to the formal part of the business. So, and that really is the matters which require resolution, and they've been outlined in the notice of meeting. So shareholders can ask questions on each matter being put to the shareholders through the online portal. So moving to the resolutions, I'll call a poll on each of these resolutions. You'll be able to cast your vote using the electronic voting card you'll receive when your online registration is validated. So to vote, you'll need to click Get Voting Card within the online meeting platform. You'll then be asked to enter your shareholder or proxy number to validate it. Please then mark your voting card in the way you wish to vote by clicking either for or against or abstain on the voting card. Once you've made your selection, please click the Submit Vote on the bottom of the card to lodge your vote. So refer to the virtual meeting online portal guide or use the helpline that I gave at the beginning if you require any help. Voting's going to remain open until 5 minutes after the conclusion of the meeting, and the results of the vote will be announced via the NZX. So each resolution set out in the notice of motion is to be considered as an ordinary resolution, and as such must be approved by a simple majority of the votes cast by shareholders entitled to vote and voting on the resolution. So in accordance with the company's constitution and NZX Main Board Listing Rule 2.7.1, Paula Jeffs, having been appointed by the board, retires from office. She is eligible to seek election. Paula's offered herself for election, and maybe, Paula, if you could just introduce yourself now.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be in a position to be offering myself up for election for a board position with such a purpose-led company as Ryman Healthcare. Not only does Ryman construct beautiful villages in primary locations offering full continuum of care, it excels through its outstanding culture to turn these villages into thriving communities and happy homes for its residents. This unique and special culture is underpinned by the simple mantra that everything has to be good enough for mum or dad. Earlier in my working life, I spent several years working as a personal carer in aged care sector, supporting me through my undergraduate studies. Through that experience, I saw everything that was good, bad, and everything in between when it comes to caring for our elders. I have never before experienced anything like the vibe that you get when you walk through a Ryman village. It's quite extraordinary and it's very special. And I want to help preserve and leverage this to support the company achieve its strategic aspirations for growth. So a bit about my credentials. I'm a career human resources professional, having worked in the field for over 25 years across multiple sectors, with my great love being healthcare. I spent 6 years as the Executive Director of Human Resources and Clinical Education at Austin Health, one of Melbourne's largest tertiary teaching hospitals, and that included 2 large aged care facilities and 2 large research institutes. During my time at Austin, I was heavily involved in cultural transformation programs, sector workforce reform, patient experience, health and safety, industrial relations, clinical governance, education and training. Earlier in my career, I spent 15 years at ANZ Banking Group, most relevantly heading up their global talent and succession management function, ensuring that ANZ both had the depth and breadth of talent to meet its needs in the areas of strategic and geographic priority. I currently hold the role of General Manager People and Capability at Melbourne Water, which is another organisation with deep purpose and a strategic imperative to meet the needs of a growing population and enhance the livability of Victoria for its residents. I offer both listed and government sector experience at the senior executive level. My professional qualifications are in psychology and media studies, with postgraduate qualifications in business, executive coaching and industrial relations. I'm a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and a certified member of the Australian Human Resources Institute. I would see it as a great privilege to be elected to serve as a Ryman board member, and I offer my skills mix to the board, who are keen to see management well supported in the areas of people, talent and culture as critical enablers for navigating a pathway to achieve our growth aspirations. So thank you. I'll pass back to you now, David.
Thank you, Paula. You can see, shareholders, why we have been so delighted to have identified Paula, and the contribution that she's already made has been really impressive. So I now propose that Paula Jeffs be elected a director of the company. Dave, are there any questions for the board or Paula concerning the motion from shareholders?
There are none.
Thank you. So please could you mark your voting cards in the way you wish to vote by ticking for, against or abstain in the appropriate place on the voting card. I'm going to give you just a moment to do that. And then, in accordance with the company's constitution and the NZX main board listing rule 2.7.1, Claire Higgins, having held office for 3 years, retires from office. She's eligible to seek re-election. Claire has offered herself for re-election. And Claire, if you would be kind enough to introduce yourself now.
Thank you very much, David, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. My role as a board member has expanded somewhat in the past 12 months to include the chair role of the Audit and Financial Risk Committee. Fortunately, we've not lost Warren's expertise on the committee, and together with George and Jeff as members, I think we have a strong, very experienced committee, pardon me, which in the current environment has been particularly focused on the financial outcomes and risk work of the committee and supporting the board in this area. As in previous years, I have continued my role as chair of what was the Health and Safety Committee. And late in 2019, we expanded the role of this committee to explicitly include wellbeing. Whilst Ryman has for some years had a focus on wellbeing, the inextricable link between wellbeing and health and safety outcomes meant that this was a logical link with the committee's work. Early in 2020, we embarked on and approved a refresh of our health, safety and wellbeing strategy. And the work plan of the committee is now clearly aligned with our strategy. The COVID outbreak has also required us to bring a dual lens onto the committee work plan to ensure that whilst adopting a new set of standards and procedures with respect to COVID, the fundamental work across the organisation on managing health and safety and our critical risks, together with the robustness of our system and program, has needed to continue to remain prominent. And as you can imagine, bringing the focus on the overall well-being of the team in this environment has complemented our work. Whilst the restrictions on our movement has prevented us from attending sites as much as we have in the past or would have liked to do, we have maintained a reasonably close relationship with our health, safety and wellbeing leaders and our construction and operation team members during the COVID period. And particularly today, I'd like to speak to my standing for re-election to the board. The experience of the last 6 months has made me even more passionate for the success of the company. I believe that Ryman offers the best in retirement living and care. Now, I'd love to remain part of the team at Ryman who have the opportunity to care for our vulnerable elderly people. And I'd also love to remain part of a team that supports and invests in people who have the same passion for care. It would be my privilege, and I'd be very proud to continue to contribute to that. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Claire, and I can advise shareholders that Claire's a consummate director. She is always well prepared. She thinks carefully about the advice she offers, and she has been invaluable. So it's a pleasure for me now to propose that Claire Higgins be re-elected a director of the company. So Dave, I need to see if there are any questions for the board or for Claire on that motion.
There are no questions for Claire.
Okay. So thank you. Look, please mark your voting cards in the way you wish to vote by ticking for, against or abstain in the appropriate place on the voting card. Resolution 3 concerns the authorisation of the board to fix the auditor's remuneration for the coming year. Deloitte is automatically reappointed as the auditor of Ryman Healthcare Limited under Section 207T of the Companies Act 1993. Dave, are there any questions for the board concerning the motion from shareholders?
There are no questions.
Thank you very much. So look, please could you mark your voting cards in the way you wish to vote by ticking for, against or abstain in the appropriate place on the voting card. So that concludes the formal part of the meeting, and you can now submit your vote. Voting will be open until 5 minutes after the close of the meeting, and the results of the vote will be announced via the NZX later today. So look, thank you everyone for your attention and your questions. As I've said, it's been a challenge. We know there's a lot ahead of us. We're in the middle of a global pandemic, but as chair of this company, I have to say it's confirmed for me what I've known for a long time, that Ryman is a special company with enormous potential ahead. So I'd like to thank my fellow directors, both here and on the screen, for all your support and your wisdom, and thank all of our 6,000 staff and our marvellous 12,000 residents and their families. And a big thank you also to all our shareholders for all your support. We really do appreciate the backing you give us, the advice you give us. We've got many long-term, loyal shareholders who realise we're in this for the long haul. We're about as excited as ever about the future of Ryman, and our mission continues to be to build as many Ryman communities as we can to meet the demand that exists. We look forward to seeing you again in 12 months' time, and we can report on progress at that stage. So thank you very much.